The scent of antiseptic lingered in the air as Dr. Evelyn Carter moved through the hospital corridor, her white coat trailing behind her. The fluorescent lights above cast a sterile glow, washing everything in pale blue. It was nearly midnight, and the ER had finally settled into an uneasy calm. Her fingers curled around the edge of the clipboard she held, but she barely registered the patient notes scribbled across its surface. Her mind was elsewhere, on a home she no longer recognized, on a husband who had become a stranger. Daniel hadn't called today. Not that she expected him to. The man she had once fallen in love with, the man who had once traced lazy circles on her back while they whispered about their future, had long since faded into someone preoccupied with work and distant obligations. Their conversations had been reduced to transactional exchanges. Did you pick up groceries? Have you paid the water bill? Void of warmth, void of them. A voice cut through her thoughts. Dr. Carter. Evelyn blinked and looked up. Nurse Patel stood beside her, offering a small knowing smile. Your new patient's in room 314. Motorcycle accident. Nothing too serious. Fractured ribs, some bruising. He's been asking for his attending doctor. Evelyn exhaled, adjusting the stethoscope around her neck. Any prior conditions? Nothing critical. He's alert, charming, and if I may say so, Patel smirked, lowering her voice. Easy on the eyes. Evelyn shook her head with a light laugh. That's not exactly a medical assessment. Patel winked and handed over the file. Just thought you'd like a warning before you step inside. Evelyn walked toward room 314, pushing open the door with practiced ease. The man inside sat upright, shirtless, his torso wrapped in fresh bandages. He turned as she entered, and for a fleeting second, she was struck by how effortlessly he wore his injuries, like battle scars he had long accepted. His eyes, a deep shade of green, held an intensity that made her pause. You must be my doctor, he said, his voice carrying a smooth confidence. She cleared her throat. Dr. Evelyn Carter. And you are? Ryan Walker. He extended a hand, his grip firm yet unhurried. I'd say it's nice to meet you, but I'd rather not be here. Most patients don't, she replied, pulling up a stool. How are you feeling? Ryan smirked. Like I got hit by a truck. Close enough. A collision at 40 miles per hour isn't exactly gentle. She glanced at his chart. You were lucky. No internal bleeding, no head trauma. Just fractured ribs and some deep bruising. He exhaled dramatically. And here I thought I was invincible. Evelyn allowed a small smile. No one is. She moved to check his bandages, fingers grazing his skin briefly as she adjusted the wrap. His body tensed slightly, not in pain but in awareness. The air between them shifted. Dr. Carter, he said after a pause, his voice softer now. Do you always work this late? She kept her focus on the bandages, but something about the question unsettled her. Hospitals don't run on a schedule. Patients need care at all hours. I get that, he said, watching her closely. But you look tired. She met his gaze, caught off guard by the concern in it. Most people saw her as a doctor first, a person second, if at all. But in Ryan's eyes, she wasn't just her title. I'm fine, she said, a little too quickly. Ryan tilted his head, as if weighing whether to press further. Instead he chuckled. You don't have to lie to your patient, you know. I won't report you for being human. Evelyn shook her head, refocusing on her work. You should rest. Your body needs time to heal. Rest is overrated. He leaned back slightly, wincing as he adjusted his position. Life's too short to waste lying around. She hesitated, something about his words striking deeper than she wanted to admit. Maybe it was the exhaustion talking, or maybe it was the way he looked at her. Not through her, not past her, but at her. She wasn't sure the last time she had felt that. You should still try, she said finally, standing. I'll check on you in the morning. Ryan's smirk returned. Looking forward to it. She turned to leave, but his voice stopped her at the door. Hey, Doc. She glanced back. I don't know what's keeping you up at night, he said, his tone more serious now. But I hope you find a reason to sleep soon. Her breath caught in her throat. He didn't say it like a flirtation, nor like an empty remark. It was something else, something that lingered long after she stepped into the hallway, her pulse unsteady. Evelyn inhaled deeply, pressing a hand to her chest as if she could steady whatever had just shifted inside her. This was nothing. Just a patient. Just another night. And yet, as she walked away, she couldn't shake the feeling that something had already begun. The soft hum of the hospital's late-night machinery filled the quiet halls as Evelyn moved through the dimly lit corridor. The shift was dragging, each minute stretching longer than it should. She should have been exhausted, should have been counting down the hours until she could slip into bed beside Daniel. Though these days, even their bed felt unfamiliar, like a place where two strangers merely coexisted. She shook the thought away and focused on her next task. Room 314. Ryan Walker. Evelyn hesitated at the door, fingers tightening around the chart in her hands. It wasn't hesitation born of duty or concern. It was something else, something she didn't have a name for yet. She stepped inside. Ryan was awake, reclining against the pillows, one arm draped casually over his bandaged torso. The room's dim lighting cast sharp shadows along his jawline, accentuating the ruggedness of his features. His eyes flicked toward her, and a slow smirk played on his lips. "Dr. Carter," he murmured. "Back so soon. Should I be flattered?" She arched a brow, ignoring the way her stomach twisted at the way he said her name. "I'm making my rounds." Ryan exhaled a dramatic sigh. "And here I thought I was special." "You're a patient," she countered, stepping closer to examine his chart. "Right. A patient you keep checking on personally." Evelyn's fingers stilled on the clipboard. She glanced at him, ready to dismiss his comment, but the way he was watching her, intent, almost amused, made her pulse quicken. "It's my job," she said finally. "Sure." His smirk softened, something unreadable flickering in his expression. "And is it also your job to look that tired?" Evelyn exhaled, suddenly weary. "You're not the first person to say that tonight." Maybe that's because it's true. She busied herself adjusting the fore-drip, anything to avoid the weight of his gaze. "You should be resting." "So should you." She didn't have an answer for that. Ryan shifted slightly, wincing as he moved. "You know, I've spent most of my life in motion. The military teaches you to keep going, even when your body is screaming at you to stop." He glanced down at his bandaged torso. "And yet here I am, stuck in this bed, forced to slow down." Evelyn tilted her head. "And how does that feel?" Ryan chuckled dryly. "Like I'm losing my mind." She allowed a small smile. "You'll heal." Maybe, he said, then paused. "But what about you?" She frowned. "What about me?" Ryan's eyes searched hers. "Are you healing, Dr. Carter? Or are you just enduring?" The question hit deeper than she expected. Evelyn opened her mouth, then closed it, unwilling to give him an answer she hadn't even admitted to herself. "I should check your vitals," she said, stepping closer. Ryan let her, his gaze never leaving her face as she pressed the stethoscope to his chest. His skin was warm beneath her touch, his heartbeat steady. "This is the part where you tell me to take deep breaths," he murmured. Evelyn swallowed. "Take deep breaths." Ryan obeyed, slow and deliberate, though she wasn't sure if it was for medical reasons or something else entirely. The silence between them stretched, charged and unspoken. She pulled away too quickly, stepping back. "Everything looks fine." He watched her, his expression unreadable. "Is that your professional opinion?" She knew what he was asking, even if he wasn't saying it outright. "You should rest," she said instead, retreating toward the door. Ryan didn't stop her. But just as she reached for the handle, his voice followed her. "You know," he said, his tone quieter now, "there's a difference between being alive and actually living." Evelyn froze, her fingers hovering over the door. She should ignore it. Should pretend she hadn't felt the weight of those words settle deep in her chest. But as she stepped out into the empty hallway, her breath uneven, she realized she couldn't. And for the first time in a long time, she wasn't sure if she wanted to. The hospital was silent, the kind of stillness that only came in the deep hours of the night. Most of the staff had retreated into the rhythm of their shifts, charting, monitoring, moving like ghosts through the sterile halls. Evelyn Carter should have been one of them, losing herself in the work, in the monotony of responsibility. Instead, she was standing outside room 314, her hand hovering just above the door handle. This was reckless. She knew it, felt it in the rapid beat of her pulse, in the heat coiling low in her stomach. She could still turn away, still go back to pretending that Ryan Walker was just another patient and not a temptation wrapped in bandages and easy smiles. And yet she opened the door. Ryan was awake. He sat with his back against the pillows, his broad shoulders illuminated by the dim glow of the bedside monitor. He looked up as she stepped inside, something flickering in his gaze. Recognition, understanding, a silent acknowledgement of the choice she had just made. "Couldn't sleep?" he asked, voice low. Evelyn closed the door behind her, leaning against it for a moment as if gathering herself. "No." Ryan's lips curved slightly. "Neither could I." She exhaled, stepping closer, her hands tightening at her sides. "I shouldn't be here." "Probably not," he agreed, but there was no judgment in his tone. Only quiet patience, as if waiting to see what she would do next. Evelyn moved to the edge of his bed, her fingers brushing against the cool metal railing. She shouldn't sit down, shouldn't give him any more of herself than she already had. But the weight of the day, of the months of loneliness pressing down on her, made it impossible to walk away. Ryan shifted, patting the space beside him. "Stay." It was one word, one invitation, one final line drawn in the sand. Evelyn hesitated, but only for a breath. Then she stepped forward, lowering herself onto the edge of the bed. The mattress dipped beneath her weight, and suddenly, they were closer than they had ever been before. Ryan's gaze traced over her face, his expression unreadable. "Tell me to stop." "You should." Instead, she whispered, "I don't want to." That was all he needed. His hand lifted, fingers brushing against her jaw in a touch so gentle it sent a shiver down her spine. Evelyn's breath hitched as he leaned in, his warmth pressing against her. His scent, something clean, something masculine, enveloping her senses. The first brush of his lips against hers was tentative, almost questioning. When she didn't pull away, he deepened the kiss, his mouth moving with a hunger that mirrored her own. Evelyn's hands found his bare shoulders, fingertips tracing along the bandages wrapped around his ribs. He winced slightly, and she started to pull back, but Ryan made a low sound in his throat, tightening his grip on her waist. "I'm fine," he murmured against her lips. She wasn't sure if he meant the pain or the moment itself, but it didn't matter, because she wasn't fine. She was unraveling, surrendering to something she had spent too long resisting. Ryan's hands slid beneath the fabric of her coat, fingers splaying against her lower back. The sensation sent heat spiraling through her, a reminder that it had been so long, too long, since someone had touched her like this, with intention, with need. Somewhere in the back of her mind, she knew this was a mistake. A betrayal, a violation of vows she had once spoken with conviction. But here, in this room, in this moment, nothing existed beyond Ryan's touch. His breath, the quiet, desperate sounds that filled the space between them. His lips traced a slow path along her jaw, down the curve of her neck. Evelyn tilted her head back, a sharp inhale escaping her as he found the sensitive skin just below her ear. "I want you," he whispered. Evelyn squeezed her eyes shut. "Ryan." He pulled back just enough to meet her gaze, his expression open, waiting. She could stop this now. Walk away. Pretend it never happened. But then his thumb brushed against her hip, and the decision was made. Evelyn kissed him again, harder this time, giving herself over to the inevitable.